All right, welcome to my chapter 13 presentation, and today we're going to talk about, like blood vessels and blood and veins and all that good stuff. So first off, the different type of blood vessels, we're going to have 5 different types. Are going to be our arteries, our arterioles, our capillaries, our venules, and our veins. And starting with our arteries are going to carry blood away from the heart and towards the peripheral capillary, while our arterioles are going to be like the smaller arterial branches that deliver blood to a capillary network. Capillaries are going to be our smaller blood vessels, and they're going to have like the walls that permit the exchange between blood and the surrounding interstitial fluid. We're going to have venules, which are more of like the thin-walled veins that receive blood from capillaries, and veins, which of course carry blood from a capillary bed toward the heart. All right, already when we look at our different veins and arteries and our capillaries, they're going to have very different structures. So we see with large veins and small sized veins, they have the same layers, the same whatnot. But when we switch over to the arteries, we see that an elastic artery is slightly different. They have an inner elastic layer, which is different from just like the 4 layers that they do share with larger veins. And larger veins and elastic arteries do have the same diameter, which is 2.5 centimeters or about 1 inch, while muscle arteries are smaller. They're only about 4 millimeters, which is about 0.16 of an inch, which is, a lot smaller. I'm not sure if how they correspond, like muscle arteries, how they correspond to the size of medium-sized veins, but medium-sized veins are in general the same size as medium-sized arteries. Yes, so similar layers, yes, but similar layers, similar functions, or like the veins with the veins and the arteries with the arteries. I'm not saying that like they do like the exact same thing, that's not what I'm saying, but yeah. Capillaries are the blood vessels whose walls permit the exchange between blood and the surrounding interstitial fluid. They average about 8 millimeters in diameter, which is bigger. The capillaries are bigger than the muscle arteries, which is really cool. Yes, I think that's all I had to talk about because of the layers. And yeah, there we go. All right. Valves. So medium-sized veins do have valves that prevent like the backflow of blood, and we see here that when the valve is closed, there's like the muscles are surrounding it, there's nothing really happening. But when they open and the muscle is contracting, what's it called? They're above and they're below. They're never inside of the muscle. So they open above the contracting muscle and right below the contracting muscle. All right, and here's just some terms to know moving forward. So blood pressure, also called arterial pressure, is the force exerted by the blood against the vessel wall, and we're going to talk about that more in a second. Sorry, I can't speak. The systolic pressure is the peak pressure measured during ventricular contraction, and diastolic pressure is the minimum pressure at the end of ventricular relaxation. And pulse pressure is the difference between the systolic and the diastolic pressures. So we make more sense in a second. No, don't mean to do that. All right. So right here, we kind of have like blood pressure and how it pertains to systolic and diastolic pressure right here. And of course, the pulse pressure is right there because it is the difference between the diastolic and the systolic pressures. So when talking about blood pressure, we see that based on where the blood is flowing, blood pressure does change. So it's pretty high when it comes to, flowing in the aorta, pretty high in the elastic arteries, pretty high in the muscular arteries, and kind of average in the arterioles. But then we go down to the capillaries, and there's a sudden big decrease in blood pressure, and even smaller in the venules, smaller in the medium-sized veins, smaller in the large veins, and even smaller in the vena cava. But that is going to make sense in a second. So when we do talk about blood pressure, it is important to realize that blood pressure is measured by systolic over diastolic pressures. You know, when you go to the doctor and they put the cuff and it's inflatable, it's because that like restricts the blood flow. And when they open it back up to open back flow into your arm where they have it restricted, they're listening for that blood flow. They're listening for the systolic pressure and the diastolic pressure to then do their what's the word, mathematical equation, the division for the mean. I thought I had it written here, but I guess not. To do the mean arterial pressure, which of course is then measured with the blood pressure. And blood pressure is affected by many things. It's affected by how the blood is flowing, the diameter of the veins, the activities that you're doing. Because if we go down here, there's two things that we do need to take note of: the baroreceptor reflex and the vasomotor controls. And these are going to be important when talking about blood pressure. So the baroreceptor reflex is going to be like change in cardiac activity in response to changes in blood pressure. So when blood pressure falls below normal, the baroreceptor output is reduced and vice versa. While vasomotor control also regulates blood pressure, it's actually going to control the diameter of the blood vessels. So when the blood vessels are narrower, remember earlier we said that blood pressure was, force exerted by the flow of blood against the vessel wall. When you have narrower blood vessels, there is less room for flow, which means that force is exerted, so blood pressure rises. And that's going to be vice versa. What's the opposite of narrower? If the diameter gets bigger, there's going to be more room to flow, so less force is needed, so blood pressure falls. And if we see on this model right here, coming back to this diagram, we see that the larger veins are slightly lower in blood pressure than the medium-sized veins. And of course, that's because the veins are getting bigger, and they're getting bigger diameter-wise. Because if you remember earlier, they were different sizes. Over here. So yes, of course, increasing the blood pressure and decreasing the blood pressure, the baroreceptors are either stimulated or inhibited. Stimulated if it's increasing, and inhibited if it's decreasing. And then based on the vasomotor center, it's going to be, vice versa as well. So if the baroreceptor is increasing because of increasing blood pressure, then the vasomotor center gets inhibited. While blood pressure is decreasing, the baroreceptors are also inhibited, and the vasomotor center is stimulated, to regulate it. So if the vasomotor is controlling the diameter and the baroreceptor is being reduced, the blood pressure falls below normal, they have to kind of like do their own checks and balances. All right. So here we have our pathways, and we have our different circulations. So when it comes to like coronary circulation, okay, so here are different pathways. I'm sorry, I mixed it up. I had specific things down below. But here are some different pathways. So here it shows you how like blood flows, and even like how carbon dioxide and oxygen can flow. If we see right here, the right ventricle, it does bring blood into the lungs so that it can get oxygenated, while the right ventricle, it's the left ventricle that also brings blood to the rest of the body. And we can kind of see the more like smaller pathways in here as well. But when it comes to the different circulations, we're going to start with coronary circulation. And coronary circulation is going to supply blood to like the cardiac muscle tissue. So, of course, the right coronary artery is going to supply blood to the right atrium and parts of both ventricles. It's going to branch into like marginal and posterior interventricular arteries, while the left coronary artery supplies blood to the left atrium, the left ventricle, and the interventricular septum. These branches are going to circumflex and anterior interventricular arteries. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the circle of Willis. I hope I'm saying that right. Circle of Willis. That's how I've been pronouncing it all this time. So these internal cartids and other basilar arteries are interconnected. They form a ring-shaped kind of like network, in the cerebral arterial circle, and of course it's called the circle of Willis, to simplify those terms a little bit. It's basically it's connecting the major blood vessels that supply the brain with blood. So it's just a big, like, interconnected network of blood vessels. And next, we're going to talk about the hepatic portal system. And the hepatic portal system directs blood from other digestive organs to the liver before the blood returns to the heart. So after passing through the liver capillaries, blood collects in the hepatic veins, which empty into the inferior vena cava. And this blood goes to the liver before returning to the heart. And the composition of the blood in the systematic circulation remains relatively stable, regardless of, like, the digestive activities that are, like, happening over here. Because if we look and see, a lot of, like, the digestive system organs are being used as well. But yes, this is just the system that directs blood from the digestive organs to the liver before the blood returns to the heart. Because as we know, yes. And last but not least, so we were told to, like, create, like, analogies and, like, mnemonic devices. And I personally study with flashcards, so I'm not sure how much, like, analogies. I have never really, like, used analogies, but I was kind of saying, like, road trip to the lungs, because, like, the right ventricle brings blood to the lungs, or, like, left for the rest, because the left ventricle brings blood to the rest of the body. But yes, I'm way better at, like, flashcards than I would say, like, these analogies and mnemonic devices. But yes, those were all that I could think of. Anyways, thank you for coming to my presentation. It was great talking to y'all. This was actually really interesting. I love learning about, like, all the blood vessels in the heart. Anyways, see y'all next week.